I was seeing quite often over there that her father was in the Air Force, and actually they only got over there about 2 months before I left. I was seeing her, and she was at the airport when I left.
Some words stay with you for a day, others haunt you for a lifetime. There's a difference between hearing something shocking and hearing something that fundamentally changes the way you see another human being. Elvis Presley's Bodyguard knows that difference better than most. Because in the final weeks of the King's life, he heard something that carved itself into his memory and never left. Nearly 50 years later, he still thinks about it, still replays the conversation, still wonders if he could have done something differently. The line wasn't dramatic. That's what makes it so disturbing. Elvis didn't deliver some grand theatrical declaration about his impending death. He didn't break down sobbing or scream at the heavens. It was quiet, almost casual. The kind of statement that slips out when someone has stopped performing for the world and finally tells you what's actually happening inside their head. And what was happening inside Elvis Presley's head during those final days would chill anyone who heard it. But before we get to those words, you need to understand who was actually in the room to hear them. This wasn't some random security guard working a shift. This was a member of the Memphis Mafia, the infamous inner circle that lived with Elvis, traveled with him, protected him from threats both real and imagined. These men weren't employees in any traditional sense. They were family, brothers. The only people on earth who saw Elvis Presley when the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds went home. Being part of that circle meant carrying a burden most people can't comprehend. You weren't just standing outside a door or scanning crowds for threats. You were a confidant, a witness, sometimes the only sober person in the room at 4 a.m. when Elvis wanted to talk about God or death or why his mother had to leave him so young. These men saw Elvis at his most powerful, commanding sold-out stadiums, making grown women collapse just by walking on stage, being treated like something more than human. But they also saw what no fan ever witnessed. The Elvis who couldn't sleep for days at a time. The Elvis who watched 3 televisions simultaneously through hollow, exhausted eyes. The Elvis who asked questions at 3 a.m. that nobody wanted to answer honestly. What happens when you die? Do you think people actually love me, or do they just love what I give them? If I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone notice the real me was gone? These weren't rhetorical questions. Elvis wanted answers. And the men around him learned very quickly that giving him honest answers meant risking everything. So they deflected. They changed the subject. They told him what he wanted to hear. And slowly, year after year, the distance between Elvis Presley the performer and Elvis Presley the person grew so vast that even he couldn't bridge it anymore. By 1977, the people closest to Elvis knew something was deeply wrong. This wasn't speculation or hindsight wisdom. They watched him deteriorate in real time. They saw the weight gain, the mood swings, the pharmaceutical fog that never seemed to lift. They noticed how he talked about death constantly, not with fear, but with a strange detachment, like he was discussing travel plans for a trip he'd already booked. He gave away possessions randomly during those final months. Expensive cars handed to strangers. Jewelry pressed into the hands of backup singers. It felt like a man settling his accounts, tying up loose ends before a departure he knew was coming. And then came the night that changed everything for one bodyguard. The night Elvis stopped performing even for his inner circle and said something so raw, so unguarded, that it shattered every illusion about what life at the top actually looked like. Before August 16, 1977, the day Elvis Presley was found dead on his bathroom floor at Graceland, he pulled this man aside and spoke words that have echoed through the decades since. Words that weren't meant for history books or documentaries. Words that were simply the truth, finally spoken aloud by a man who had run out of reasons to hide it. It wasn't a goodbye. That would have been easier to process. It wasn't some poetic final statement designed to be remembered. It was something far worse. It was a confession, a warning, and ultimately a cry for help that nobody knew how to answer. But to understand why those words cut so deep, why they've haunted this man for nearly half a century, you need to understand what Elvis Presley's life had actually become behind the gates of Graceland. You need to see what the world never saw. Because I promise you, it was nothing like the legend. The truth was far darker, far lonelier, and far more tragic than any tabloid ever captured. The world saw white jumpsuits and sold-out Vegas residencies. They saw the man who met President Nixon in the Oval Office, who owned more Cadillacs than most people own pairs of shoes, who seemed to have everything any human being could possibly want. But the Bodyguard saw something else entirely. They saw a man who hadn't left his bedroom in 4 days straight, a man who had staff members taste his food before he'd touch it because paranoia had become his constant companion, a man who kept loaded guns on every surface of his private quarters because somewhere deep in his fractured mind he believed someone was always coming for him. Elvis Presley in 1977 was not the king. He was a prisoner serving a life sentence in a castle he'd built with his own success. The daily rhythm at Graceland would have seemed insane to any outsider. Elvis slept during the day because daylight meant visibility, and visibility meant danger. He came alive at night when the rest of Memphis slept, wandering the halls of his mansion like a ghost haunting his own life. His inner circle adapted to this inverted schedule, which meant existing in a kind of permanent twilight where Tuesday felt identical to Saturday, and months blurred together into one endless, suffocating routine. Then there were the pills. Doctors enabled it, friends watched it happen. Nobody stopped it because stopping it meant confronting Elvis, and confronting Elvis meant losing access to everything his world provided. So the prescriptions kept coming, uppers to get him on stage, downers to help him sleep, pills for pain that may or may not have been physical. By those final years, Elvis consumed enough pharmaceuticals daily to stock a small clinic. His body was breaking down under the chemical assault, but acknowledging that meant acknowledging the whole system was broken. And nobody wanted to do that. But the pills weren't the cruelest part. The isolation was. Elvis Presley could not go anywhere. This is something fans never fully grasped. A simple trip to the grocery store would cause absolute chaos. He couldn't walk through a mall, eat at a restaurant, or sit in a movie theater like a normal person. Every public appearance became a security nightmare, a mob scene, a reminder that he belonged to everyone except himself. So he stopped trying. Graceland became his entire world. The same rooms, the same faces, the same conversations circling the same topics, while outside those gates, life continued without him. Month after month, year after year, Elvis watched himself decay in a prison made of fame and money and everything people think they want. The Bodyguards understood their role in this system, even if they didn't fully admit it to themselves. They weren't protecting Elvis from assassins, though that fear was real enough to keep everyone on edge. They were protecting him from reality itself, from fans who wanted pieces of him, from journalists who wanted stories, from anyone who might pierce the carefully constructed bubble and tell him truths he wasn't prepared to hear. The Memphis Mafia was paid to say yes, to laugh at his jokes whether they were funny or not, to pretend every impulsive decision was brilliant, to act like everything was fine while watching someone they genuinely cared about disappear before their eyes. These weren't heartless men. That's what makes the story so tragic. Many of them loved Elvis like a brother. They remembered the young man from Tupelo who couldn't believe his own success, who gave away money to strangers because generosity was carved into his bones. They mourned the slow erasure of that person even while they enabled it. By 1976, the warning signs were everywhere. Elvis talked about death with disturbing regularity, not dramatically, not seeking attention. He discussed it with a detached acceptance that unnerved everyone who heard it. He asked strange questions during those late-night hours. Do you think anyone will remember me? What do you think happens when we die? Do people actually love me, or just the idea of me? Everyone around Elvis knew he was slipping away. But no one was prepared for what he said on that night at Graceland. The words that made one bodyguard realize just how completely alone the king had become. It was late. Of course it was late. Everything meaningful with Elvis happened in those strange hours between midnight and dawn when the rest of the world slept, and Graceland became its own isolated universe. The bodyguard was on duty that night, stationed in the quiet mansion while most of the household had retreated to their rooms. Elvis had been in one of his moods all evening. Not angry, not manic, something far more unsettling. He was reflective in a way that felt heavy, like a man taking inventory of his own life and not liking what he found. The call came through the intercom. Elvis wanted company. Not for an errand or a task, just to talk. The bodyguard made his way to the bedroom, unsure what version of Elvis he would find behind that door. Some nights brought laughter and old stories. Other nights brought paranoid ramblings that went nowhere. But this night felt different from the moment he stepped inside. Elvis was sitting in the dim light, television flickering silently in the corner, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the walls of that room. He started talking before the bodyguard even sat down. His words drifted toward his mother Gladys, the woman whose death in 1958 had shattered something inside him that never fully healed. He spoke about how she died young, how the Presley bloodline seemed cursed with early graves, how he always knew deep in his bones that he would follow the same path. Then his thoughts turned to Jesse Garon, the twin brother who died at birth. The ghost Elvis carried with him every single day of his life. He told people throughout his career that Jesse watched over him, guided him, existed somewhere just beyond the veil of the living. That night, Elvis talked about Jesse like he was preparing to finally meet him, like the reunion was coming soon and he had accepted it completely. The bodyguard listened in silence. What could he possibly say? These weren't normal conversations. This was a man unraveling the threads of his own existence out loud, and all anyone could do was witness it. Then Elvis turned and looked directly at him, not through him the way he sometimes did when the pills took over. He looked at him with complete clarity, complete presence, and he said words that froze the bodyguard where he sat. "I'm going to die soon, and when I do, everyone's going to pretend they knew me. They'll cry, and they'll play my music, and they'll say all the right things. But none of them actually know me. Not really. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people, and I don't think I've ever been more alone than I am right now. You want to know what really scares me? I don't think I've ever been truly known. Not once. Not by anyone." The silence that followed was suffocating. The bodyguard searched for something to say, some reassurance that would break through the despair hanging in that room. He told Elvis that people loved him, millions of people around the world, devoted fans who had followed him for decades. The man just shook his head slowly, a sad smile crossing his face. "They love the idea of me. They love what I give them. They don't love the person sitting in this room because they've never met him. And honestly, I'm not sure anyone ever will." Elvis turned away after that. The conversation was over. No dramatic conclusion. No breakthrough moment. Just a man who had finally said the thing he had been carrying for years, and another man who had no idea how to respond to it. The bodyguard left that room carrying a weight he didn't fully understand yet. Weeks later, Elvis Presley was dead. And the world mourned exactly the way he predicted they would. They mourned the king. They played the music. They gathered at the gates of Graceland with flowers and tears. But how many of them mourned Elvis Aaron Presley, the scared kid from Tupelo who built an empire and lost himself somewhere inside it? The man who looked his bodyguard in the eyes and admitted he had never felt truly known? That question still has no answer. August 16, 1977, the day the music died for millions of people around the world, Elvis Presley was found on his bathroom floor at Graceland, unresponsive, beyond saving. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, but everyone who knew him understood the real cause. Years of pharmaceutical abuse had ravaged his body. Isolation had consumed his spirit. He had been pushed beyond human limits by a machine that demanded everything and gave back nothing but applause. The world reacted exactly how Elvis predicted they would. Radio stations interrupted programming to play his music for 24 hours straight. Fans collapsed at the gates of Graceland, wailing for a man they had never actually met. Newspapers ran special editions. Television networks scrambled to assemble tribute packages. It was massive. It was theatrical. It was everything Elvis said it would be, and it was entirely about a character, not a man. The bodyguard watched it all unfold with a sickness in his stomach that had nothing to do with grief. He grieved, certainly, but mixed with that grief was something far more corrosive. Guilt. The kind of guilt that settles into your bones and never fully leaves no matter how many years pass. He left that bedroom on that night without saying the things he should have said. He didn't call a doctor, didn't demand an intervention, didn't grab Elvis by the shoulders and tell him that this had to stop, that help was available, that people genuinely cared about the man behind the legend. He did what everyone in Elvis's orbit did. He enabled. He stayed quiet. He told himself that tomorrow would be different, that someone else would step up, that it wasn't his place to challenge the most famous man on the planet. After August 16th, he had to live with those choices, and he has been living with them for nearly 50 years now. This is the part of the Elvis story that rarely gets told. We love the rise, we're fascinated by the fall, but we don't spend much time examining the people who stood in the room and did nothing while it happened. Not because they were evil, not because they didn't care, but because the system surrounding Elvis made intervention almost impossible. You didn't challenge the king. You didn't suggest that something was wrong. You protected the brand, maintained the image, kept the revenue flowing, and when it all collapsed, you carried the wreckage with you forever. The tragedy is that this isn't just an Elvis story. This is the template. We have watched this exact pattern repeat itself for decades since that August morning. Michael Jackson surrounded by enablers who fed his demons until they consumed him. Whitney Houston drowning in addiction while an industry looked the other way. Prince alone in an elevator, gone before anyone could reach him. These artists gave us everything they had, and we took it without ever asking what it cost them. We love to mourn our icons. We are far less interested in saving them. Elvis told someone the truth about his life in those final weeks. He said out loud what he had been feeling for years, and the person who heard it didn't know how to respond. Because we don't train people for those moments. We train them to protect schedules and manage appearances and keep the machinery running smoothly. We don't teach them to hear a cry for help and actually answer it. What does it mean that Elvis Presley, the most famous entertainer on earth at his peak, died believing that no one truly knew him? Maybe the chilling part of this story isn't what Elvis said. Maybe the chilling part is that he was right. The world didn't mourn Elvis Presley the person. They mourned what they lost. The music, the movies, the memories of their own lives that his voice had soundtracked. The man who sat in that dim bedroom and confessed that he had never felt truly known was buried without anyone mourning who he actually was. That bodyguard never forgot those words. And now, neither will you. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of what Elvis carried, then subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me what you think he would say to us today if he could. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. The King's story deserves to be remembered differently.